joining us today, Ben Portnoy from the Commercial Dispatch.
What's up, y'all?
Going to keep the sports talk going. And let's just open it up really quick. The big news out of yesterday, Mike Leach picking up Sawyer Robertson. What does that mean for Mississippi State's football program next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really big pickup. I mean, just from a pure numbers perspective, Sawyer Robertson's the highest-rated quarterback recruit that Mississippi State has signed in going on 17 years now, since 2003. And that's pretty much since recruiting rankings have become a real thing. In that vein, I mean, you look at it, this is a guy who's really big. He's 6'4", 205 pounds. I mean, he profiles like a guy that would do well in Leach's system. Threw over 400 passes over 300 passes in both of the last 2 years. It's a high schooler in Lubbock, Texas. I mean, this is a guy who really does fit the system. And I think beyond that, I mean, this is a 2-quarterback class. You've also got Daniel Greek signed, and he's another guy who's about 6'3", sort of 200 pounds-ish, similar sort of at least mold. So at least you're kind of seeing what kind of quarterbacks Leach is looking for physically. And beyond that, it's 2 straight guys from the state of Texas. I mean, we knew that Leach had a lot of ties to Texas. I mean, that goes without saying, having spent a decade at Texas Tech. But, with what Mississippi State has recruited and with where their offers stand in terms of, like, scholarship offers in the class of 2021, they've offered more kids in the state of Texas than anywhere else in the country right now. So I think you'll see that, we talked about, I think, when Leach got hired, that you would see a little bit more national recruiting from this staff. And I think you're seeing that just off the bat. And I think, Sawyer Robertson's commitment and ultimately recruitment before that sort of magnifies that a little bit.
I think the big question people might be asking right now is, with Leach bringing in these different quarterbacks, what does that kind of mean for Garrett Schrader, for Keaton Thompson? Obviously, those aren't his guys and they're not really fit from what we've seen for a Leach system. Do you think we see them going into the transfer portal? Where do you think they land?
I mean, I think it would be surprising to see the quarterback room stay as it is. I mean, nothing's been made official or anything like that. And to my knowledge, no one's in the transfer portal at the moment. But I think that it's fair to assume that there will probably be some attrition. You've got 6 quarterbacks going into next year in that room right now, and that includes Alan Walters, who's a Vanderbilt transfer and was a pretty highly thought of recruit out of New Jersey. And is another guy who's about 6'3", 6'4", so, backing that up. But I think you will definitely see some attrition in some capacity here. I mean, I think that KJ Costello is definitely the starter this year. But beyond that, it sort of remains to be seen. I think Garrett Schrader is a really dynamic guy, and I think he gives coaches and Mike Leach specifically, and a guy who can run and a little bit more than I think that he's had in the past, and is more athletic guy than he's had at quarterback maybe. But when you look at it, like, Garrett Schrader's completion percentage hovered around 55% most of last year. He's not necessarily the most accurate thrower. I think he's got a lot of potential there and he's got a strong arm, but I think that, when you're going to have a guy throw the ball 60 times a game, you need someone who can put the ball on the mark. Different offenses, I get that, different receivers, I know. But like I said, I think that you're going to see some attrition from this quarterback room, especially when you've already got 2 guys coming in the 2021 class. You're going to have 6 guys on the roster this year. Theoretically, if everyone stays, that puts 7 quarterbacks on this roster next year. And that's 6 of whom would be scholarship quarterbacks. So one would think there will be some attrition there, but you don't really know. And it goes without saying. And Will Rogers is a guy who's a freshman now who was recruited by Leach at Washington State, and I think that's worth noting too. So, even though he's a guy that was signed by Joe Moorhead's staff, he's a guy that Leach's staff at least recruited pretty heavily at Washington State. So I think that what you're seeing is kind of for lack of a better term, the overhaul of the quarterback position.
The other fun part about that too, Ben, is Sawyer Robertson also committed to Mississippi State baseball. And obviously you mentioned he looks like a guy, when you watch his highlight from high school, he looks like a guy that plays baseball. So you look at up the road at Ole Miss with Jerry and Ely and John Rice Plumlee. Is this kind of the fun way of the world now, where you have these guys committing to 2 schools, bringing back maybe the Bo Jackson, Don Sanders of college sports again?
Yeah, I'm not going to go on a limb and say that that Sawyer Robertson is the next Bo Jackson, because I think that's unfair. But, obviously it's a fun thought, and I think it's true. I mean, I think it just shows you how much more athletic some of these guys have become. I think it's kind of a thing that we've seen over the years. The guys playing football in 1930 aren't necessarily as athletic as the guys playing now, and some of that comes with weight programs and things like that, and it changes over the years. But I think that, it goes to show that there's plenty of guys who can play both sports. I mean, even just in more recent history, Jameis Winston played baseball at Florida State when while he was still quarterbacking that team to a national title. So, it's a thing that I think you're seeing around college sports. And in the SEC, it makes sense. I mean, the baseball is great, and that goes without saying, but it's funny. I was talking to Sawyer Robertson's high school coach last night, and he was saying that when they got him in as a freshman, one of the hardest things for him was to sort of find a tight spiral. The guy could throw the ball all over the field, but finding a tight spiral was really hard because he was so used to throwing a curveball. And it's funny just sort of seeing the translation there, but he's a big-armed guy, and I think the baseball can only help and, helps a guy athletically and staying in shape all year round.
There's another quarterback that we all know very well who used to play baseball too. That's Patrick Mahomes, who has that gunslinger ties. And his dad was a baseball player and everything. So I'm not going to say Sawyer is going to be the next Patrick Mahomes, but it's just kind of interesting how, there's a lot of guys who have that football, baseball background.
We're throwing a lot of big names right now. Bo Jackson.
Put it on Twitter. Chris Bolton says Sawyer Robertson is the next Patrick Mahomes.
Clickbait.
I mean, I will say that I think that, like, Sawyer Robertson's a more athletic guy than maybe his numbers show, and the baseball is part of that. I mean, if you look at his film, there's a lot of clips of him, rolling out and moving in the pocket, and I think some of that comes from baseball. Obviously, you practice it in football, and you have to be quick and agile, but I think that, like, this is a guy that even the fact that he's, 6'4", 205, like, he can move better than I think people realize. And I think, I'm not going to say he's Tommy Stevens back there because Tommy, I think, was a really good runner in that vein, but I think that, as Seth Parr, his coach last night, was saying that this is a kid who can play pretty much – he can play safety, he can play wide receiver, he can play tight end. I mean, he's that kind of guy, that kind of athlete. So, I mean, obviously he's going to stand back and throw 60 passes a game, assuming he's the starter, and lead his offense down the road at some point. But at the same time, like, the kid can move, and I think you'll see that a little bit, and you can see it on his film a little bit too.
I want to go back for a second to how you mentioned Garrett Trader's completion percentage being around that 55% range. I think the joke for State has always been this always run, never pass concept. So people were historically really happy with quarterbacks who ran the ball really well. I mean, look at Nick Fitzgerald from a few years back too. Wasn't much of a passer, but his ground game matched up to that. Do you think it's going to take a hot minute for people to adjust to seeing more of a air offense than what we've seen from the Bulldogs in the past?
Well, I think this is something that's, like, matriculated over the years because, like, you look at it a couple of years ago, and I know things tend to start at the NFL or start in college and then move to the NFL, but you look at it a couple of years ago when Colin Kaepernick took the 49ers to a Super Bowl, Cam Newton took the Panthers to a Super Bowl. I mean, those were guys that could run heavily, and I think you saw a lot of that, and there was just sort of people were enamored by the idea of quarterbacks who could run. It's kind of fading backwards a little bit now. I think you see that, these wide open offenses where you have quarterbacks throwing the ball over the field. Joe Burrow last year is the perfect example. I know it's not an air raid offense, but that's a spread offense where you've got people all over the field. You're slinging it all over, a lot of crossing routes, short routes, slants, things like that. And I think for people in State, I think you're obviously between Dan Mullen and Joe Moorhead, you had run first offenses, and it'll take time. I mean, I think that, for one, the personnel isn't necessarily there in year one, and that's the biggest transition is you got to recruit your own guys. And I think that's sometimes an undersold piece of a coaching change. But I think that people will, for the people who were annoyed that coaches didn't hand the ball off to Colin Hill enough last year, they're probably going to be pissed off this fall. But that's, that's just part of what you get. I think people understand that, like, what you get with Mike Leach is a lot of passing. You're going to lead the nation in completions. You're going to lead the nation in attempts. You're going to lead the nation in passing yards. So I think that there's a general understanding that, like, you're gonna see a lot of passing, and that's understating it to the nth degree. But I think that, people will probably be annoyed when Colin Hill only touches the ball 125 times next year versus I think he had 330 carries this year. So you'll see a different offense, and I think it'll take people time to adjust to it. But I think that at the same time, people will come to love it. I know for me, I love watching Big 12 football. So the idea of seeing the ball thrown 60 times a game gets me excited, but I don't know about the rest of the fan
It
base.
definitely seems like for the SEC, almost if you're not passing, the chance of you winning a game seems to dwindle. I mean, if you look at guys like Tua Tagovailoa, you mentioned Joe Burrow, heavy passers, and got incredible results from doing so last season. So I think, I don't know if you agree, Mississippi State moving in that direction is kind of where the game is going. I think it's probably best for them at this point.
Well, it's an interesting thing because when you look at it, like LSU and Alabama are perfect case studies because those are programs that were ground and pound. They're going to beat you in the trenches, and they're still that way, but, would run the ball 50 times a game. You look at Les Miles' offenses, you look at Nick Saban's offenses for most of his tenure at Alabama. I mean, they were pretty, not power eye, but, they were running the ball heavy, and that's kind of was their MO. But in the last couple of years, whether it's Tua, whether it's Joe Burrow, those are offenses that have seen a total facelift and, really gone into, trying to spread the ball around and throw the ball a little more. And I think that's just, frankly, just kind of what the modern football has become, for better or worse. I mean, you're seeing a lot more passing. And I think that, Mississippi State will take that to the farthest point with Mike Leach.
To new heights.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it'll be insane with Mike Leach, how many times they're going to throw the football. But I think at the same time, it's part of sort of the progression of where college football has gone in the past couple of years. Like I said, when you have programs like, 10 years ago, if you said that LSU was going to be, have a quarterback that led the nation in passing or finish in the top 10 in the nation in passing, like, that's insane. It just isn't something that would have happened. And I think the same goes.
You could have said that 5 years ago.
Exactly. And the same thing goes for Alabama. I mean, so when you look at it, I think that that's just kind of how teams have had to adjust. And this isn't to say that those teams have completely, ignored the run. I think both teams have produced really good running backs in the past couple of years and will continue to do so. And, Mississippi State's got a guy like Colin Hill who led the SEC in rushing last year. And I think you're going to see him get a lot of touches. It'll just be, instead of handoffs, it'll be swing passes, it'll be screen passes, it'll be slants, it'll be things like that. And I think that there's a lot of benefit to that. And I think that, frankly, like I said, it's just kind of how college football is trending right now.
And you look at Kyler Hill, you mentioned the pass game too. Like, that will only help his NFL prospect. Well, yeah. The game is moving that way. But Ben, how big of an impact do you think no spring football is having on Mississippi State right now as they go through this overhaul of the system?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, for context, I was on the phone with Mike Leach for 45 minutes the other day from Key West, and he was saying that, I was asking him kind of, just general stuff about the roster. And he said, the quote he had was basically, it's like seeing the presents under the Christmas tree, but not being able to touch them or open them. And I think there's it's a very, Mike Leachism, but I think there's a lot of truth to it. As the reality is, he hasn't had the chance to actually get to see these guys that much. I mean, there's been a lot of, spring and winter workouts and stuff like that. But, beyond that, they haven't really had the opportunity to get on the field with these guys. And I think that's the biggest problem. And the general consensus is that, everyone in the country is dealing with this, and that's fine. But the reality is when you're a first-year coach, you're trying to install a system, install a culture and that kind of thing. And you can't do that if you're not on the field and in the weight room with these guys. And it sets you behind a little bit. I mean, there's no way to get around that at the moment. And I think that, most people can agree that, it's for the betterment of our society and staying inside and all that. But I think that, when it comes to on-field results, he hasn't had a chance to even really get to know the guys. And I think that is a big piece of it. I know that they've been having staff meetings pretty regularly. Head coaches at Mississippi State have been having phone calls with John Cohen, like joint phone calls with John Cohen twice a week since this has all kind of gone down to keep people in the loop. And I think there's a lot of benefit to that, but there's a limit to it. I think that there will be some – if I had to guess, I think there will be some kind of way to work with the fact that spring ball has been canceled, at least to this point. And when that happens, who knows? But I think there will be a way to remedy that in some capacity. But I think that, Mike Leach is definitely playing from behind at least a little bit. That said, Mike Leach's offense is is famously known for being very simple to grasp.
Right.
I was doing some reading when he got hired. A lot of his former quarterbacks have said that they literally ran more complicated systems in high school. So, on that front, it's nice and, it makes the transition a little easier, but at the same time, it's still learning a new offense, a new culture, a new coaching staff. And I think that, the only way to do that is with face-to-face interaction and time, and not really a substitute for that.
What's interesting right now is we're starting to see classes in the summer get moved to online. I'm wondering how long we wait to see if summer practices also get pushed back. And we had Brett Hudson on the podcast yesterday and touched on this a little bit of what all of this means for summer ball and how that will affect starting up the season in the fall. What do you think about all of that?
I mean, it's hard to peg, and things are changing day to day so much. But I mean, I would be frankly shocked if, things start on time. I think that, with the way that summer class is being pushed online and things like that, that basically, from the surface level, that means that things are trending toward, more toward fall and things like that. There's been some reports out on Twitter and stuff like that, and from, larger national outlets that it's been in discussions to move the season to the spring, and what that would look like, I don't know. I think there's a lot of question marks there, but
move the football season to the spring?
Yeah, moving football to the spring. So for those of you, for people like us I'm trying to imagine covering women's basketball, baseball, and the football season all at the same time. But
March Madness and Egg Bowl in the same week.
I can't even fathom. But point being, I think that I think things are trending that way, and not necessarily to say as crazy as moving stuff to the spring, but I think that it's possible that you could see the season start a couple of weeks late or something like that, just because the reality is, you need to get those practices in, and it's not just new staffs. I mean, there are rules in place with the NCAA that you have to have a certain number of non-padded practices before you can go full pads, and that's a real thing. And I think that you'll probably see to say that the season wouldn't start at least on time or a couple of weeks late wouldn't surprise me, especially when you see that so many schools are going to online classes over the summer as well.
What do you think is more likely, seeing the season get pushed to the spring or seeing them do a condensed season in the fall?
I think that I don't think you'll see a condensed season. I would say that, I think that you'll see a season pushed back. I wouldn't be surprised to see the season start in, the first week of October versus the first week of September, just for the sake of kind of, like I said, getting some.
Got to make that money.
And money, yeah. Chris makes a good point. I mean, the reality is so many of these schools, Mississippi State is in this category as well, is so many schools around the country rely on football to fund their entire athletic department. I was looking at, I think it was Ross Dellinger, former Mississippi State guy, tweeted something the other day about LSU and how their all of their fall sports, I think total cost $30 million or something like that, lost a total of $30 million. And the football program generated $63 million of revenue, give or take. And so, the idea that football programs literally pay for athletic departments is a very real thing. So I think that you'll see is that they're going to get this football season played. When and how and where, who knows, and that's changing day to day. But I think that the reality is this football season will be played. It's just a matter of in what capacity and when.
I'm going to be stuck on this idea of having football in the spring for the rest of the day, because that sounds like the most wild concept to me.
I have a counter.
Yes.
Ben, yes or no answer, playing the college football season like a high school football jamboree.
Again.
I'm on this hill.
I'm going to say no.
One team.
I'm going to say no, because you need the separate games for attendance and that kind of thing. You just have to have it. And you're not going to be able to pull that many schools into one place. You need the on-campus ticket sales and that kind of thing. That's at least my concern with it. But
all right, Ben, another very quick question.
Yes.
How are you maintaining the lettuce during this trying time?
It's growing out. I trimmed my beard the other day because I was I look a little bit too much like Tom Hanks in Castaway. But I'm getting there. The hair's getting a little long. We might be headed toward Omaha length again, but I can't really do anything.
I feel like we're rapidly approaching hat season, permanent hat season.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think y'all all know that I'm a hat guy, but yeah, it's definitely hat season, and I'm very content to be living in a backwards.
Hat season until further notice.
Especially since the barbershop is closed.
Ben,
it
you
will
rock
forever
the
be hat
flow
season.
Before you can rock the flow again.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. Is like I'm not that concerned about it because I've always had long hair growing up, so I'm cool with it growing out a little bit. You know, it might get annoying at some point, but gonna need a haircut eventually. Luckily, I got a haircut right before kind of the world ended, so I'm in good shape for now.
How does the peanut gallery feel about that? And by that I mean your wonderful girlfriend Ashley.
She asked if she could cut my hair. I said no, but that's where we're at now.
You can't do it.
I was like the only person
with
I had with a pair of scissors was someone with a registered barber's license.
I think that's fair.
I have a very interesting question. This one comes from the peanut gallery as well. My wife Amanda was asking me this last night, I believe. And I was wondering if you knew this, Ben. We were talking about a little bit about Sawyer Robertson, kind of going back to that, about a football player who's also committed and signing with a baseball player. Do you know if he were to redshirt in one sport, what would his eligibility look like down the road in terms of, if he started on the day one roster for baseball but redshirted as football, could he play 5 years of football but then not full 3 of baseball? Like, does anyone know the rules?
Can you even redshirt in one and not redshirt in the other?
Yeah, so there's not. Yeah, so actually a good example of this is Brad Cumbest. He redshirted the football season his freshman year and played baseball and didn't redshirt in baseball. So he technically maintained, 4 years of eligibility in football and, has 3 left in baseball or whatever. Yeah, 3 left now with the NCAA legislation. So I think that I don't have a perfect solution for you, but my understanding is that basically your eligibility is sport by sport versus,
year by year.
Yeah, exactly. So, could he redshirt football and then play a season of baseball? Sure. I think that's kind of at least that's my understanding of the rules. I could be wrong there, but at least that's my understanding of the rules. And I think
I'm very confused by that. I was like, wow, that's actually a really good question. I have no idea.
Yeah, there's definitely, and I haven't looked at the NCAA rule book or guidelines because there's, God knows how much jargon and stuff that you can get lost in there. You might need a lawyer to look through all that stuff. But I think that, to my understanding, is that, he could play baseball and football and say redshirt in one and not redshirt in the other. Because at least as far as I know, that's what Brad Cumbest did. And I think that, he still has his 3 years of eligibility in baseball and I guess technically 3 years of eligibility in football now, but they're 2 years of eligibility in baseball. Yeah.
Interesting.
And what's the biggest thing you miss about spring sports in terms of this year? What was something you were really looking forward to that you didn't?
I was really looking forward to baseball season. I mean, as you guys know, I just came up on a year being in Starkville, and one of my favorite things was baseball season. I think it was the thing that, I didn't really have that good of a grasp on it just because, SEC baseball is a whole thing in itself. But I loved baseball season. It was definitely one of my favorite sports to cover, and there's a different feel to it. It's very fun just being at the ballpark every day, hanging out. It's kind of a fun, chill, setting, and really enjoyed it. Duty Noble in the spring is a great place to be. I was looking forward to another time being in Omaha, hopefully, but holding up all right. I miss baseball though.
I miss sports in general.
I miss having regular things to write about. I will say that it's forced me to get really creative, and I think that's a good thing. But at the same time, having games and storylines helps. But I suppose.
If you could only bring, and I'll open this up to everybody. Let's say, and this is a hypothetical situation. Let's say for the next year, you can only bring one college sport back.
Is this a year thing, for the entire calendar year?
We're talking baseball, basketball, or football?
Yeah, basically.
Okay. Football, no question. I'm a football guy first and foremost, so I'm college football all the way.
Football too. Yeah, it's got.
Yeah.
Especially this year with Leach and Lane Kiffin, that's
right.
Get into my arms.
That's true.
I was going to say football too.
Yeah, I could watch any football game. I'm all here for Pac-12 after dark. I'll stay up till whatever the last game on at night is and watch it just because I'm kind of psychotic that way. But it literally doesn't matter. My parents used to make fun of me because I'd be watching, Hawaii versus BYU at 1 a.m. and they're like, what the hell are you doing? Go to bed.
All about that matching.
That's what I'm saying. Give me Wednesday night college football. I'm all about it. So I'm a college football person first and foremost. So I'd say football, but I will say there's something really, from at least a fan's perspective, I would say college football, but at the same time, from a covering perspective, I really loved covering college baseball, and I think it's a really fun season. I think there's a lot there to it. So
I got to bring back March Madness would probably be my consolation prize.
That's my number one.
This is the great. If you had to pick, if I got to play football season but only one championship setting, it'd be football regular season, March Madness as the championship, just because of, especially this year. We talked about it last week, just the amount of parity that I thought that was going to go into the tournament this year would have been obscene. So I had a feeling this was going to be peak March Madness. And so it's like a feeling of loss that I didn't get to have.
Indiana made the Elite Eight in the simulation going on. Just throwing that out there.
Let's go.
What happened to Duke?
That's how you know it's a simulation.
Get out.
I won't argue with that, but you make a valid point.
No. Chris is the number one Indiana hater.
I'm a realist, the Indiana truther.
Yeah.
No, you're a hater. You don't like to see me happy. That's what it is. You hate to see me feel joy.
No.
Courtney
the Bears don't like to see you happy because they drafted Mr. Trubisky.
Why are we bringing the Bears into this? Don't bring them into this.
Courtney and I are just consistently disappointed and sad at watching Indiana basketball. They were going to make the tournament this year. There was excitement to be had, and then
that's what I said.
That Corona happened.
Now, in fairness, it was all for safety, and I'm behind that, and that's cool. So,
but also,
and what about this situation? UCF wins the AAC tournament. Taco Fall comes back for another year of eligibility.
They should have made the Sweet 16 last year.
Ben, don't remind me.
They should have beat Duke in the first round.
RJ Barrett hooking and push off. Never forget.
Coulda, shoulda, woulda.
Still the 2017 national champions?
Football for sure.
Yeah, still there. The parade through Disney World was the best thing that's ever happened. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Hey, Ben, if we did a simulation with the updated rosters for Mississippi State's football season, what do you think their record would be? Okay,
so I've been going back and forth on this for literally since Mike Leach got hired, and I cannot figure out what I think this team is going to be. I think that I've pretty much narrowed it to I think they're going to be 4-4 heading into their final 4 games. And those final 4 games are, if I have it right, it's Kentucky, Missouri, Ole Miss, and Alabama A&M. Someone can fact check me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's right.
I'm working on it.
And I feel fairly confident saying they're going to win at least – I mean, they're going to beat Alabama and A&M, and then at that point you just got to win 1 game to get bowl eligible out of Kentucky, Ole Miss, and Missouri. Missouri should be down with a first-year head coach. Other than that, I think that – I'm going to say they go 6-6 because I'm generally an optimist, but I'm gonna reel that back. I said 8-4 last year. I think that was probably a little bit of a stretch. Obviously, there was a lot that went on, but yeah, I'm going to say 6-6. I think they get to a bowl game. I mean, I think that their schedule lines up well, and it's pretty much the same. I mean, it's not the same team, but fundamentally, they're playing the same skill sets that they played last year. I think they're going to win I think the game that matters the most is the NC State game week. What is that, week 2?
I think so.
I think that's going to be the biggest. I think that's going to be the biggest game of the year because you're going to look at that game and basically you're either going to have to, if you win that, go on the road and win in Raleigh, and that's a team that lost a lot of people to injuries last year and wasn't, their record didn't necessarily reflect how good they were. I think that game plays a lot like the Kansas State game did this year. If you win that game, you're sitting comfortably at 7-5, and whether you go to Nashville or not, who knows? But still, you're sitting comfortably and bowl eligible going into the Egg Bowl. So I think that if you win that game, you're in good shape, and you're almost certainly making a bowl game. But
we can play a fun sports cave game really quick. It's called W or L. We'll run through the football season. Week 1. Home versus New Mexico, W. At North Carolina State.
I'm going to say W, but I wouldn't be shocked if they lose that game.
I'm going to
go ahead and say W.
Yeah, I agree with that take.
I'm going to say W as well. Home versus Arkansas.
W.
Arkansas is still 4 years away from being a real Division I team at this point.
There,
There's a lot of
W.
going on.
Home versus Tulane.
W, but I think that's a trickier game than people realize.
Trap game.
That seems like a very
Around
peak
there.
Mississippi State lose when they should have won.
Tulane's an interesting game. I mean, that's a team that runs sort of it's not a triple option offense, but close to it, and there's not a lot of passing there. That's an interesting game for sure. That's a team that won.
Home versus A&M.
Especially against a 4-2-5 defense. Probably L.
I'm gonna go L.
I'm going to say
Home
L.
against A&M, I'm going W because State has that weird juju against A&M. They seem to always win against A&M when they probably shouldn't. So I'm going to go W. So I'm at 5-0. That's where I'm at.
I'm 4-1. I think L though, just because I think that, and not to be the one to buy into like A&M as kind of the sexy pick to be the win the SEC next year. I hate that because I don't think it's necessarily true, and I still think they're not quite there. They've recruited really well, but I think Kellen Mond has a ceiling as a quarterback. But I think that A&M's
he's reached that ceiling.
Yeah, and I think I mean objectively, I think that A&M's going to be better this year than they were last year. But at the same time, I still don't. I don't think they're going to win the SEC, but I think they're going to win that game.
Hello, welcome to Doom at Alabama.
Yeah, no, lost.
Good luck.
Well, week after that at LSU.
L.
Even
though LSU
L, that could be a good game. Like we
It's
see how if State's looking real good, they could win because who's going to be the quarterback at LSU?
Miles Brennan. Stand up.
I don't think that LSU
and they lost Joe Brady. So
I think that LSU is going to drop off, but I think that sort of the storyline that LSU is going to fall off a cliff and go 6-6 next year is kind of ridiculous. I mean, I think LSU still goes 9-3 next year.
Right. Are they the national championships again? Probably not. But
yeah, but I mean, they're going to win 9 games. They're talented. They're talented. They recruited too well. I think LSU wins, but
I'm gonna say it'll be the John Emery show next year at running back. So he's really good. Possible Heisman, hopeful.
Home versus Auburn.
Loss. I think Auburn's going to be good next year. I know they lost a lot on the defensive line. That could be an interesting game though, because I think that Bo Nix will be better at quarterback, but I think that
People have to be.
Seriously, but Auburn lost a lot on that defensive line, so you may see that could be an interesting game, but I think Auburn still wins.
I'll say W.
All right, I'm saying L.
I'm not big on Auburn.
W.
I'm definitely not big on Bo Nix.
The final 4 games.
Oh, I don't know. I'm L. I'm switching my Auburn.
Okay.
Final 4, Missouri.
W.
I'm gonna say W because I think Missouri's gonna be down.
Home against Missouri, so I'll go W. At Kentucky.
That might be an L.
I'm gonna say W because I think Kentucky's still got to figure out life without Lynn Bowden. But
literally their entire life is Lynn Bowden.
Now that said, I think that it goes underappreciated what a good job Kentucky did holding things together last year.
They won 7 games last year without a quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, and they're going to have a quarterback this year. I think Kentucky's going to be solid, but I think that Mark Stoops is criminally underrated as a head coach, and we can all agree on that.
I think that's a road game State win, so I'm going W.
I'm going to go L because
I'm going to say they lose at Kentucky.
Yeah, because it's going to be the one game where like you almost feel like you have to win, but it's a road game. And the last time, what was it? The last time they were on the road against Kentucky, it was
the Benny Snell show.
Benny Snell show. Yeah.
Was that game like 23-7?
Yeah, but they scored 2 touchdowns with 5 minutes left because the defense was gassed.
Yeah, that was before my time, but
that was that like the hothead game, as I'll call it.
Hothead game?
They had all those penalties.
Oh.
Yes, they had like 120 yards in penalties that game.
Yes. Yeah. Home against Alabama A&M.
Win.
W.
Egg Bowl, Oxford.
I can't pick this. I don't know.
I think State's going to win. I think, like, generally speaking, I think that State has recruited better than Ole Miss in the past couple of years. I think just from a purely roster perspective. I think it's going to be weird, and I think it's going to be a close game, but I think State's going to win.
I'm with Ben. I think I would just go based on the returning talent.
True, but it seems like some of the guys on Ole Miss have maybe like a higher playmaking ceiling than some of the guys.
Chris just did the link more so not so fast.
I mean, you got JRP, you got Jerry and Ely. Those are Snoop Connor. Those some playmakers, some guys who can hit big 70, 80-yard games.
I'm going to go Ole Miss because I think right now it's set up that Mississippi State should be the more likely of the two to win, and as we know, that's never how it ends up. So because of that,
for that reason, I'm out.
For that reason, I'm out. I can't invest.
So at this point, though, it's a
bowl. Saying State's 7-5.
Right. I was to say, I think mine's 8-4. Why do I always end up 8-4?
I still think State. I think that State could lose the Egg Bowl, and I think they could lose week 2 to NC State, and frankly, they could lose to Missouri. I mean, I don't think Missouri's going to be that good next year, but I still.
It's
think
kind of like last year, though. They were Tennessee trap game away from being a possible 8-4 team last year.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. Like that's why when I said like this schedule lines up virtually the same as last year. I mean, it's one of those games. Like it's one of those years that if they win the games they should win, they're probably all right. And I will say to Mike Leach's credit, while he doesn't have as many marquee wins as you'd probably like, I mean, I know he struggled a lot against I don't think he ever won a game against Washington, if I'm correct, in the Apple Cup. But Mike Leach generally wins the games he's supposed to win, and the same thing happened with Dan Mullen too. And I think that if State takes care of business in the games they can win. They can win. I mean, this is a team that can go 8-4. Will they? Probably not. But I think that I think they're kind of their range is somewhere between 5-7 and 8-4.
This is also the fun like NCAA 14 simulation too. Obviously, if you take into account there's no spring football, like let's assume there's no summer. I don't see how a team with a brand new head coach with a brand new install can get a team to 8-4.
Right.
I think they're going 6-6. I think they're going to drop a game like a Missouri, like a Kentucky, like NC State. They're going to lose one of those games. Even though I think they said they were going to win all of them, but I think they're going to lose one of those games.
This is the perfect note to wrap things up on. We'll leave it at that. Ben Portnoy, 6-6 for Mississippi State this season. Ben, again, thanks so much for joining us on the pod.
Thanks for having me, y'all. This was fun.
Probably won't be the first or last time we have you back.
Happy to do it. Can't wait to do it again.
All right. Thanks, man.